Welcome, bienvenue, welcome on in to another live stream. As you may notice, Vicky Poole is all wrapped up in her shawl in her very cool studio. She is from Tender Response. I'm Gareth from Many Purple Hats, and we often discuss all things to do with public sector tendering. And today is no different. We're talking about budgets and procurements. Teach me, Vicky Poole.
Teach you. Yes.
Yes,
Well,
please.
you always know it's bad when the jolly lass is in a shawl.
It's worrying.
So yeah, well, it is the season to do budgets. Fa la 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 la. So yeah, it's budget time here at councils, and this is really, really exciting. Not. So this is when all of the departments across the council. So there's typically 4 or 5 of them, depending on how the council's been set up. And they all present their wishes, their wants to the elected members who sit on the executive, and the political party in control of the council, with support of the financial officer, pull together a budget for the next financial year. So what does that mean? It means that this time of the year, you get a lot of, how much is this going to cost? You get a lot of requests for information. So how would I do this? If I wanted to have this result, what would I need to do? And you get a lot of those questions because what they're looking to do is to understand the art of the possible before they put together their wish list or shopping lists that they then present to the elected members.
Okay.
And then the budget will, so September to mid-October, you get a lot of officers asking for quotes, a lot of wish lists, a lot of strategy stuff going on, market research bits. And then from October to January, early-ish, you get the members negotiating with each other about they're going to have this but not that, and instead of having 5 of this and 2 of those, we're going to have 1 of each and fund this project over here. And they set out what's going to be planned, what they're going to implement, what they're going to change for the people next year.
Right.
And of course that plan comes into place on April the 1st. Now also during this wonderful time, the time right now where we're in budget, we're looking back at the last 6 months and going, ooh, we're underspent. Yay!
But hang on a moment. There's always this old myth that if you don't spend the entirety of your budget, then when it comes time for the next year's budget to be agreed, that they'll look at your previous underspend and say, well, that's what you should have had, and that's what your new budget's going to be. Is that the case?
Not necessarily, because it depends. Like always in public sector, it depends. So when you're running like capital projects where you're building something or you're installing something new, you're always going to have little hiccups. Like something should take, if you're doing like a planning application, like say for argument's sake, you're building a school, the planning application goes in and you're not expecting it to be challenged. Right. So you could have like say a town council challenge the application because the design of the building doesn't meet quadruple A BREEAM standards and it's only compliant with triple A because you're on a floodplain, or you can't acquire the materials within the costs, and you have to go through planning process, which depending on the council, depending on the process, could mean it has to wait and then sit and get reviewed by members of the planning committee. And then once that's been reviewed or rejected, or the outcome has been achieved, the project can then continue. So if you've got, say you got 3 million attached for this project, that's 3 million is ring fence for that project. And I think I'm going to put a spade in the ground this year, and therefore on my accounting practice, I need to attribute for it. But if I'm going to get stuck up in planning applications and my planning process moves out the project right by say 8 months, 10 months, I still have that 3 million. It just moves along on the balance sheet. There are some projects though. So like, for example, if you're completing a school and you have that 3 million budget and you've only spent 2.2 mil, that's 800 grand underspend. Well, that then goes back into the council's pots and they can then choose where to spend that money. Now, depending on where that money's come from, it could come from grants or transformation funding or any number of places. If it's come from a specific education pot, it has to go back into education. If it's come from general council funds, otherwise known as revenue, that can be on any other project. So when you have that underspend that comes in, and say you find that out now, say that school was supposed to complete in July, you completed in July, you've got the final, you have 12 months for snagging, but typically there's not significant amounts of money that come through in snagging. They could look at that and go, ooh, 800 grand, what we're going to do? I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to use that money. We're going to spend that in year because it's been budgeted. And then you get a flurry of activity. So as part of the wish lists that in this example, the children's team will be doing, for example, AR, VR in schools, interactive whiteboards, play parks, all that kind of wonderful stuff. They go, well, actually, we've got this 800 grand. Let's do this. And then you find a whole load of tenders that come out between October and January because they need to complete in year. They need to physically give you the contract in year. Now, there are some times where projects you have to reapply for funding, and this is what's known in the name changes slightly. So this is like when you've got, like, when you're building something, you spend it through like the capital expenditure, the one-offs, there's big planned money. You allocate that funding on a year-by-year basis, and this can often be known as transformation. So if you have like a big transformation project and you're going to be looking at 13, 14, 15 different streams of work over a 2-year period, that 2-year period is then costed. So if you've got slippage and everything is moving right, you then need to attribute money or kind of balance everything out, so you're spending the same money over, say, a 3-year period or a 2.5-year period, but you then need to reapply for the existing funding because you got slippage, because it depends on how the money's been booked internally. Now, what does all this mean? How does this all impact public sector procurements? Right? So you have your budget. So just because you have a budget for something, you've got £2 million for a school, you've gone out for your process, your planning process, and everything's been completed, you're going out for tender. Just because you've come in under budget doesn't mean that the council is able to say, here you go, here's your purchase order, because it doesn't quite work like that. You've then got to go through procurement sign-off procedures. Right. So the initial procurement sign-off procedure will, again, be different in every council. Typically, there are thresholds. So it'll be 5 grand, 10 grand, 50 grand, 100 grand, $500,000 and over, as an example. The thresholds will vary. And there'll be gate posts where people have to pass. So are we buying something that's in budget? Yes. Is the supplier that we are buying from accredited / meet our minimum standards? Yes. And this is really important because sometimes the council will set standards for suppliers that the council is aiming to achieve themselves. So I'll give you an example. If the council is looking to go ISO 9001 compliant for their quality regulations, it is unlikely that that council will already be certified. And it's unlikely that they're going to be asking their suppliers to be ISO 9001. So they will start asking, as part of tendering processes, are you 9001 compliant, or are you working towards it? And then it'll be tick boxes and, how does this supplier fit into our strategy? Does it need to go to, what's the approval level? And then if you need level 5, you've got to go through level 1, 2, 3, and 4 to get to 5, because that's the sign off that you need. You don't go straight to that point. So a lot of these places it's the, I need to buy this widget. I need to go to Gareth to get approval. So you've got to go through Mary to Anne to Bobby to Gareth. And a lot of these times they go, well, this is going to go to Gareth Bax for approval. Could you rubber stamp it to get it to Gareth? Now, when you look at this process, can you imagine what's going to happen if someone's off on sick? Or someone takes a long weekend? Or someone's forgotten their login for a password or a system?
It's got single points of failure. It's got single points of failure written all over it, and it would just all come to a grinding halt.
Yes. So just because the tender process finishes on the 1st of the month and people are going to be notified of their outcomes on the 2nd of the month, doesn't mean to say that you're going to have contracts. So people say, well, why have we got 2 weeks for Alcatel? You've got 2 weeks because it's going to take the council about 2 weeks to get their arse in gear, technical term, so that they can give you the paperwork. And sometimes you'll have the paperwork, because what will happen is, well, some procurement teams, depending on how they're structured and what their governance is, some procurement teams will run things in parallel. So you'll have the external stuff where the supplier has it in the contract, and the supplier is doing their internal governance to get the contract physically signed. And then you'll have the internal governance go through. So if a member is sitting on something and, you know, they're waiting for something to be signed off, you've then got to chase an elected member to get something done, or the higher level of the process. And I'll point to myself here because I happen to be an elected member at a council. So some of the stuff that I've talked about here is kind of related to Westbox and kind of not. So this is like industry generic standard stuff that could be really useful and valuable to people out there.
Yes. Yeah. So it is applicable elsewhere.
So what kind of
there are some specific ones to your council, but in general, it all applies equally, right?
Yeah. So questions I normally get asked at this point, Gareth, is what can a supplier do?
What can a supplier do, Vicky?
Well, that's a really interesting question, Gareth. Thank you very much for asking. So suppliers can take some time to get to understand the process. So if you are working in a particular service, say, for example, you deliver virtual reality headsets to schools, you might want, I know, that is a thing. That is a thing. In fact, that is a thing, actually, because central government in this new administration, they've actually pumping money into new age tech in schools. So there is actually an online place where schools can go to access virtual classrooms. So these are templates that you can use for education.
It's a very different world.
Not at Westbox. We're not looking at this at the moment, but it could be. No, not that I'm giving any hints or anything, so I'm not. It's not my area. I don't touch it. Eek! Sorry, Heather. Heather Codling's the portfolio holder for Children's Services. She's the one you want to sweet talk if anyone is watching. So what can suppliers do? So it's really important that suppliers understand what happens within their sphere. So if you sell into one particular council, it's going to be relevant for that one council.
Right.
If you sell into a portfolio, for example, libraries, children's services, adult social care, highways, right? Or maybe you just want to cut the verges. You want to make sure that everyone's able to see the road ahead. There will be processes that are unique to your industry. So it's about getting to understand and know those. So how do you do that? So there are lots of different ways that you can go about it. Some of this is going to be posted on council's websites. So you can troll through websites yourself, or you can get someone to do that for you. It's one of the services that we do here at Tender Response, is a little bit of research. So we troll through websites and pull out information for you and pop it across back to you to save you a bit of time. You can also approach the portfolio holders, which technically they should all be advertised online. Now, portfolio holders are incredibly busy people. So if you don't get a response immediately, it's probably because they're in budget. And unless it's relating to an existing service that's within their budget this year or next year, they're likely not going to be able to give you time. Technically, we should all be responding inside of 30 working days. Right. I tried to aim for a week, but I mean, a lot of this stuff I kind of signpost and direct out to other people because it's not my responsibility. And that's not me being stoked shoulder, but I can only advise on areas that are within my portfolio. Now, what else can they do? Freedom of information requests is another good one. So if you've got councils that buy from a preferred supplier arrangement, it's really useful to understand what that preferred supplier arrangement is and if there are benchmarks that you need to attain. So things like, oh, yes, you need to fill out this supplier enrollment, send across your insurances and, these 5 or 6 certificates. So all this is done directly through the council and it's not advertised on Crown Commercial Services procurement sites. So that is an email into procurement at council. And if you're sitting there looking for business and thinking, when am I going to see this? When's this tender for verge trimming going to come out? Technically, that tender could be done under preferred supplier arrangements, and therefore it would never see you. And that would be done under delegated authority within the council. So you could be sitting there waiting for a tender and never even see it because it hasn't hit you or hasn't been released. So pop in a request to procurement at council. We'll talk about freedom of information requests. So these are things I would never ask more than 3 to 5 questions. And I'd also be very careful, because if the council believes that the responses are going to be used for commercial gain, that they can choose not to respond. So I'll try and keep it.
I think this is a good time for us to bring up the famous resources.
Resources. Oh my God, yes. So in our resources, we've got some 10 tips for tendering, which is kind of helpful and useful if you're looking to get into the tendering space. The thing that I want to share a little bit more about is actually an event that we've got coming up. So we have an event on the 9th of October, which if you click into resources, is it resources? Oh, you got me confused now. So you've got resources and webinar on our website. It's probably going to be our first link in there. It's called the Public Sector Sales Kickoff. And this is all the wonderful stuff that you're going to need to know if you're even thinking or contemplating about running into public sector sales. Now, public sector is a £6 billion a year industry. So if you're not thinking about public sector, sorry, mate, but you're missing out. And there's all sorts of things. So today, when I was doing some bid scanning for clients, I come across tenders for coaching, leadership training, EV chargers. I came across dustbins and bin collections. You know, we've had a bit of a bumper week on tenders. So if you're not looking at public sector tenders, you could be missing out. If you have a couple of hours free on the 9th of October, that event, which is the Public Sector Sales Kickoff, is the place for you to be. And if we're not currently connected, give me a follow and you'll get to see some of the speakers that are going to be presenting at that event. It's 2 hours. We've got some presentations, some demonstrations, and 3 panel discussions with all the stuff that you need to know for public sector. There'll naturally be calls for action. So if you are interested in looking to understand a bit more about any of the chosen topics that are there, you can also register for further learning.
Perfect.
I've made them all free. Crazy like
that. I take notice of that. I'm just going to quickly pop up the old tender response telephone number, which is a WhatsApp number. So please do send a message through. And
oh yeah,
there you go. And it only remains for me to say thank you so much, Vicky. It's always a learning day. And if you need to get some better clarity on A, whether or not this is something you can do, or B, more importantly, what you should do next, then I would suggest you contact.
Hello. Nice.
Brilliant. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.